So this one here, just being a basic for those that didn't watch it, is the idea that if you corrupt the money, you corrupt the incentives of society, and if you corrupt the incentives, you corrupt the society itself. So, if we look back, and Oliver's been in the market far longer than I have, longer than my lifetime, but pretty much anyone and anywhere in the world, but I'm speaking particularly to the U.S. Western audience, is that since the early 70s, the United States has gotten, I would say, increasingly corrupt. The political sphere and the culture, obviously there are different ways to quantify that, but I think that's pretty objectively true, that we're getting more and more polarized, we're getting more and more short-term minded, and everyone's becoming poorer and poorer, and inequality is growing, dependence on government subsidies is growing, and all these things, and the basic reason for that is because you have money, you have a political system, which is the United States or your country of origin, wherever you are, and that nation issues currency, political currency units, in the same way that a company issues equity, it issues corporate energy units, aka stocks. A government issues, units of its ledger. And when the government wants more money and they can't tax more people because taxing is unpopular when it comes to re-elections, it's just easier to print money, and so that's what they do. They twist the rules of the ledger a little bit. You have a given set of rules, like, okay, we have the U.S. dollar as an example, and there's a given amount of those, and we're going to now twist that a little bit to get what we want so that we can have a higher chance of getting reelected, because our opponent's not going to print more money, so we will, so that we can offer more free stuff. And so when that happens, you corrupt the incentives, you increase the need for subsidies, you increase the number of lobbyists, you increase people's demand for subsidies and everything. And when you have that, you get inefficiencies in the society. So a lot of people here started 2020 afterwards. I think that's an excellent example of what's happening in a microcosm here, is that, what happened is that we had the pandemic. People panicked. People demanded that the government twist everything, give us free stimulus and all that. And, as an American, I just want to apologize to everyone watching this from anywhere else in the world, because what Donald Trump and the United States did is that we stole from you. We stole purchasing power from you. The United States, we issued trillions of dollars of stimulus and currency. And what we did is we stole purchasing power from everyone in the chat here, Venezuela and Portugal, and where else are people from? Colombia, Paraguay, lots of South America, Israel, lots of South America, lots of Europeans. And that's what we did, because what we did is we printed money. So we gave ourselves purchasing power and we spent it onto you. It's the same idea as a CEO of a company issuing more stock and dumping it on the retail investors that buy those corporate energy units, the stocks of that company. It's the same thing that we did in the US. And so we're not just corrupting the rest of the world and causing them to lose purchasing power. We're also doing it to ourselves, except we're a little more delayed than the rest of the world, because it has to come back to us. But anyway, that's the long story short, that as we become increasingly dependent on a system that requires infinite liquidity and infinite debt, we become more and more top heavy. And as we become more and more top heavy, that causes people's incentives to become misaligned, and then the society becomes more corrupt and more destabilized as a function of that. So that's the basic idea there. And the next slide, it just backs off to that, and it goes directly to misinformation. So the reason that there is so much more polarization, again, this is America-centric, but it applies to everywhere, I would argue is for this reason, because the money is a lie. And when the money is a lie, what is money? It's just the unit of information that we communicate the value of any goods or services in. And so when that's distorted, everything becomes distorted. The market becomes less efficient. Some people can't find workers at all. Other people have way too many workers, and there's too much fluff and too much everything. And the same thing's true in politics, that as we increasingly have a society that relies on a lever that goes back and forth between print and don't print, print and don't print, what you have is all the constituents and all the participants in that society congregate on basically two hands. They're trying to pull the lever back and forth. And this is, if you look at history, again, we were talking about history before, it's like this happens every time. It's so predictable. It's ridiculous. What you have when you have an increasingly centralized lever that controls the direction of the flow of money, you have two parties or you have two large groups of people that fight over that. You can't have one group, because if you have one group, then you have the money just flow in one direction and then nobody trusts the money. You have to have two groups. And if you have more than two groups, say 3, 5, 10, 100, they congregate back onto two groups, because when you have more groups than that, they all unite, because when they unite, they can become a larger force against the other group. And so basically, the long story short is that's why we're seeing so much more polarization. And if you look at that chart there, you can see that from the 1980s onwards, we have the conservatives getting more radical. We have the more progressives and liberal types getting more radical. And no matter what your political leanings are, perhaps you're a conservative, perhaps you're a liberal, but the reality is that politically speaking, the middle of the aisle, quote unquote, is getting shrunk down more and more to a sliver. And that's why there's so much more destabilization in that. And then the top left chart there being the term misinformation in Google Trends. And you can see that that's clearly had an uptick in the last few years. And again, why is that? It's because as people feel that they're being robbed, they feel that something's happening and they can't put their finger on it. We like to assign tangible blame to tangible things when we feel that there's an intangible abuse of our purchasing power. And so, my next slides here are going into a couple examples of history. I don't know if you want to go for those, Oliver. I'll just skim through those.
Yeah, let me grab it. Let me just say this. That it's a very, very powerful statement. If the money is a lie, everything is a lie, and that strikes that strikes very profoundly to me. And it just to even sort of use an example, like we often talk here about how the pricing of homes, for instance, the value of a home should actually go down in value over time, not go up in value over time. And that's directly correlated to the fact that the money is broken. Because the money is broken, there's this illusion that the value of a home rises in price, but in reality, it's the corrupt money or the broken money that's being debased over time that creates the illusion or the lie that the price of your home or the value of your home is rising. Would you say that's pretty much the case?
That's exactly the case. That's one of the things I bring to people's attention first, because basically most people look at Bitcoiners and like, wow, those are a bunch of conspiracy theorists. They think there's like this big mega, whatever. But it's like you point out the obvious paradox that most people just come to accept, and then they're like, huh, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Because what you're saying there, the point here is that if technology forces house prices and the prices of cars and everything else to go down as a function of time, why are prices going up and going up exponentially, continually for decades and decades and decades? When you bring that to people's attention, they realize, wait, there's a paradox going on here that's been going on my entire life I've never thought of before.
That's right.
What else could I be missing? And then if they're smart, they'll start thinking about that, and then it'll become obvious to them.